He told me, we're going to look at a more comfortable place, Dad. And I believed him. Like a fool, I believed my own son. But he took me straight to the nursing home and never came back.
And you know what I discovered after that? That while I was locked up in that place, he had changed my will. He sold my house, my things, everything. But Michael made a mistake that would cost him everything, because there are certain things about his father he never imagined.
He told me, we're going to look at a more comfortable place, but at 68, they left me in a nursing home and never came back. Then I discovered they had changed the will and sold everything. That was the worst decision of their lives. The morning of March 15th, my son Michael arrived with that fake smile he'd perfected since his 30s. "Dad, I found the perfect place for you," he said while checking his phone with more attention than he'd given me in months. "It's a premium assisted living facility with gardens, 24-hour nursing care, and other gentlemen your age for company." I should have been suspicious when he mentioned other gentlemen your age. Michael had always been calculating, but this time there was something different in his eyes, something that reminded me of when he was a kid and had broken my favorite radio, lying with the same conviction he was now using to convince me this was for my own good. The car ride was silent. Jennifer, my daughter-in-law, didn't even look at me through the rearview mirror. She was wearing that expensive blouse she'd been coveting at the mall, the same one she'd said they couldn't afford when I denied them the loan last month. Curious how she could afford it now. The first sign was when the facility director asked me to sign some routine paperwork. 35 years working as a CPA don't just disappear, and I immediately recognized what was in front of me, a complete power of attorney transfer. "It's just for medical emergencies, Mr. Williams," the nurse assured me with that professional smile I'd seen 1,000 times. I signed, because frankly, what choice did I have? My son had disappeared after promising he'd come back tomorrow to see how you're settling in. That tomorrow turned into a week, then a month, and finally into the harsh reality that they'd deposited me there like a check they no longer wanted in their account. The second sign came when Frank, my roommate, showed me the local newspaper. "Look, Bill, your house is for sale," he said with that mixture of pity and curiosity that characterizes elderly people when they smell someone else's tragedy. There it was, my 2-story house, the garden I'd maintained for 20 years, the garage where I'd taught Michael to change tires, all reduced to an 8-line real estate description. The price made me tremble, not from cold, but from pure rage. They'd listed it at $380,000, almost double what I'd paid for it. My son had calculated well. The real estate market had risen, and he'd waited for the perfect moment to get rid of me and keep the profit. But Michael had made a mistake that would cost him everything he'd gained from his betrayal, and much more. You see, when you've been a CPA for decades, you develop certain habits, certain contacts, certain understanding of how money really works in this world. And it turns out there were certain things my dear son didn't know about his father. Nursing homes are strange places to rediscover who you really are. During the first few weeks, I immersed myself in that gray routine that characterizes these places. Breakfast at 7:30, medications at 9, mandatory nap at 2, dinner at 6. As if we were children again, but without the hope of growing up. Frank turned out to be more than a roommate. He was a former lawyer who had arrived at the facility under circumstances similar to mine, courtesy of a daughter who had decided that Daddy was better as an anecdote than as a reality. "The difference between you and me," he told me one afternoon while we played chess, "is that you have that look that says this isn't over." He was right. Every night, lying in that bed that smelled of disinfectant and resignation, I mentally reviewed every detail of my financial life. The savings Michael thought I'd spent on medications, the investments I'd made in companies he didn't even know existed, the contacts I'd cultivated for decades who still considered me a friend, not a burden. The third week, I decided to make my first move. During visiting hours which Michael never attended, I asked the nurse to bring me a phone. "I need to call my doctor." I lied with the same ease he'd lied about the more comfortable place. I dialed a number I'd memorized 15 years ago. "Attorney Martinez? This is Bill Williams." "Yes, the CPA from Henderson and Associates. I need you to do me a favor." Michael appeared for the first time after a month, not out of guilt or affection, but because there were problems with the house sale. I knew because he arrived with that expression of controlled panic I remembered from when he was a teenager and had crashed my car. "Dad, there's a small legal problem with the house," he said, sitting in the plastic chair the facility provided for visits. "It seems there are some discrepancies in the property papers. You didn't make any modifications to the title without telling me, did you?" I smiled with the same innocence he'd used on me. "Son, at my age, I can't even remember what I had for breakfast. How would I remember legal papers?" The lie came out so naturally that I almost believed it myself. But Michael wasn't stupid. He'd inherited my intelligence, though not my patience. "Dad, the notary says there's a corporation that owns 40% of the property. A corporation that was created 3 years ago." His eyes narrowed. "Do you know anything about that?" "Oh, son, you know I was never good with those corporation and paperwork things," I replied, adjusting my glasses with a tremor that wasn't completely fake. "Maybe you should ask your accountant." The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd been my accountant for the last 5 years, handling my finances to save me complications. What he didn't know was that he'd only been managing 30% of my real assets. The rest had been flowing into legal structures I'd created with the help of colleagues, who understood that old age doesn't mean stupidity. He left that afternoon more confused than he'd arrived, but not before leaving me a small victory. He'd brought my cell phone, believing it was a gesture of kindness. "So you can call us when you need something," he said with that forced smile I was already sick of. What he didn't know was that phone was exactly what I needed for the next step. The financial world is smaller than people think. After 35 years auditing companies, managing their books, keeping their secrets, you accumulate a certain social capital. And that capital, unlike money, doesn't depreciate with age. My first call was to Carmen Vasquez, credit director at the bank where Michael had applied for a business loan using my house as collateral. "Carmen, this is Bill Williams." "Yes, I know it's been a while. Listen, I have a question about my son Michael." Carmen confirmed what I suspected. Michael had not only sold my house, but had used the property guarantee to obtain a $150,000 commercial loan to expand his consulting business, a business that, according to my contacts, existed mainly on paper and in my son's imagination. "The problem, Bill," Carmen told me with that confidentiality that only exists between old acquaintances, "is that your son hasn't made a single loan payment. We're considering foreclosing on the collateral, but with these legal problems with the property." "Carmen, let me make you a proposal," I said, feeling for the first time in months that adrenaline I'd missed so much. "What if I told you that the corporation that owns 40% of the house would be willing to buy Michael's debt?" The silence on the other end of the line was music to my ears. Carmen was intelligent. She knew exactly what I was implying. "Bill, are you the owner of that corporation?" "Let's say I have certain influence in the decisions it makes," I replied, enjoying every word. "And let's say that corporation has a particular interest in my son learning some lessons about responsibility." The second call was to Jennifer. My daughter-in-law answered with that honeyed voice she used when she needed something. "Mr. Williams, how nice to hear from you. How are you at the facility? Michael tells me you're very comfortable." "Jennifer, I need you to do me a small favor," I said, ignoring her comments about my comfort. "Could you get me Michael's business papers? I want to better understand what my son is working on." "Of course, Mr. Williams, but why do you need them?" "I'm thinking about making a small investment in Michael's business. A surprise, you know." The lie was so obvious it hurt to say it, but Jennifer took the bait with the desperation of someone who saw easy money. "How wonderful, Mr. Williams. Michael will be so happy. I'll tell him to bring you the papers tomorrow." What Jennifer didn't know was that I already had all the papers I needed. What I wanted was time. Time for Michael to realize that things weren't going as he'd planned. Time for him to feel that anxiety I'd felt when he left me in this place. Time for him to understand that he had gravely underestimated his father. The following days were a symphony of missed calls and desperate messages. Michael called me at odd hours with that voice that tried to sound casual but couldn't hide the tension. "Dad, have you talked to anyone at the bank? Carmen told me you'd called her." "Me, son, here at the facility I barely talk to the nurses," I replied with the innocence of a saint. "Although, now that you mention it, I did call the bank to ask about my pension." Could Carmen have gotten confused? I could hear Jennifer arguing with him in the background. Their voices filtered through the phone, revealed the tension that was building in their marriage. "How did you not know about the corporation? You were his accountant," she screamed at him with a hysteria I found strangely satisfying. "Jennifer, calm down," Michael told her, with that false authority men use when they've lost control. "My dad never talked to me about any corporation. It must be a notary error." But notary errors don't explain bank transfers. They don't explain signed and certified documents. They don't explain why suddenly all of Michael's financial contacts seem to be reviewing their accounts and reevaluating their credit lines. Frank watched me with a mixture of admiration and concern. "Bill, I don't know exactly what you're doing, but be careful. Desperate sons are more dangerous than greedy sons." He was right, but I had passed the point of caution. Every day I spent in that facility, surrounded by other elderly people who had been discarded by their families, reminded me that dignity isn't negotiable, that respect isn't begged for, that justice sometimes has to be manufactured by oneself. The most satisfying call came on a Thursday afternoon. Michael sounded defeated, almost vulnerable. "Dad, we need to talk. In person. Can I come see you tomorrow?" "Of course, son. You always have open doors here." The double meaning wasn't accidental. After all, the facility was the only place where I really had open doors. Michael arrived alone. Jennifer had decided to stay home, according to him, to take care of things. But I knew the truth. She had begun to distance herself from the financial disaster that was coming. Rats always abandon ship before it sinks completely. He sat in the same plastic chair, but this time there were no fake smiles. His eyes had that defeated look I'd seen in so many clients when they finally understood their numbers didn't add up. "Dad, I need you to be honest with me," he began, with a voice that tried to be firm, but trembled at the edges. "Did you create that corporation?" "Michael, I think the right question is, why didn't I tell you about it?" I returned his gaze without blinking. "The answer is simple, because I knew exactly what you'd do with that information." I watched his shoulders slump. The mask of the concerned son had finally fallen, and what remained was a man who had realized he'd been playing against a much more experienced opponent. "Dad, I just wanted to make sure you were well taken care of," he murmured, but even he knew it sounded pathetic. "Taken care of?" The word came out with more venom than I intended. Is taking care of me lying about a more comfortable place? Is taking care of me not visiting me once in a month? Is taking care of me selling my house without consulting me? I needed the money. The business is having problems, and I thought if I could use the house as collateral. "Michael, stop." My voice had acquired that authority I'd used for decades in boardrooms. "Don't insult me with excuses. We both know this wasn't about need. It was about greed and convenience." He remained silent, and for the first time in months, I could see my real son. Not the manipulator he'd perfected over the years, but the scared child he'd been. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. "What do you want me to do, Dad?" he asked finally. "That, Michael, is the right question. First," I said, pulling out a folded paper from my pocket, "I want you to read this." It was a letter I'd written that morning by hand, with my shaky but legible handwriting. It's a confession. It explains exactly how you planned all this, from the moment you decided I was more valuable dead than alive. "Dad, I never—" "Shut up!" The force of my voice surprised even Frank, who was pretending to read his newspaper in the bed next to mine. "You read the letter, sign it, and we keep it as insurance." Michael read in silence, and I could see his face getting paler. I had documented everything: the lies, the manipulations, the illegal transfers, even the way he'd forged my signature on some documents. This isn't legal. You can't force me to sign something like this." "You're right," I admitted. "I can't force you. But I can make sure your bank loan is foreclosed tomorrow. I can have the corporation sue for fraud. I can have Carmen review very carefully all the documents you signed using my name." I watched him calculate the options in his head. Michael had always been good with numbers, but terrible at calculating the emotional consequences of his actions. "And if I sign? What happens then?" "Then," I continued, enjoying the moment, "we talk about the terms of my release from this place. Because you see, son, it turns out I don't need your permission to leave. I never did. That power of attorney you made me sign has a clause you didn't read. It can be revoked at any time by the grantor if he's in full use of his mental faculties." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I'm leaving here, today, and that the corporation is going to buy your bank debt, and that you're going to pay me back every penny you owe me, with interest, working for me until I consider you've learned your lesson." "Dad, I can't. Jennifer is going to—" Jennifer already left, Michael. The information had arrived that morning, courtesy of a gossipy neighbor who had seen my daughter-in-law loading suitcases into her car. "She took her things while you were here. Apparently she decided that a bankrupt husband wasn't as attractive as a rich father-in-law." Seeing my son completely break down should have been satisfying, but in that moment, I just felt tired. Tired of betrayal, tired of revenge, tired of being the adult in a relationship that should have been about love, not power. "Sign the letter, Michael," I said softly, "and let's start over." Michael signed the letter with the same trembling hand he'd used to sign the documents that had brought me to the facility. But there was something different in his expression. For the first time in years, he seemed relieved. "Dad," he said after finishing, "I really thought this was best for you. The facility, the nurses, not having to worry about the house." "Michael, the problem wasn't that you made decisions for me," I explained, putting the signed letter away. "The problem was that you lied to me. You treated me like a child, as if I couldn't understand or participate in decisions about my own life. But you never seemed interested in discussing these things, because you never asked me directly. You always arrived with decisions already made, expecting me to simply nod." I leaned back in the chair, feeling for the first time in months that I could relax. "Son, I'm 68 years old, not 8. I can handle difficult conversations." We spent the next 2 hours talking, really talking. Michael told me about financial pressures, about how Jennifer had been pressuring him to solve the dad problem, about how he'd felt he was failing as a provider. I told him about loneliness, about nights awake, wondering if I'd really been such a bad father, that my son preferred to get rid of me rather than ask for help, about how I'd begun planning my revenge, not for the money, but for dignity. "Dad, can you forgive me?" he asked finally, with tears in his eyes I hadn't seen since he was a child. "Michael, I forgave you a long time ago. What I need is for you to respect me, and to understand that respect isn't begged for, it's earned." I left the facility a week later, not because I'd planned a dramatic escape, but because I simply presented the right documents and left. Frank helped me pack my few belongings and made me promise I'd visit him. "Bill," he told me while we waited for the taxi, "you were the best roommate I've had. But above all, you reminded me that being old doesn't mean being useless." "Frank, being old means having experience, and experience, used correctly, is power." Michael was waiting for me at my house. He'd spent the week cleaning, fixing the garden, and preparing everything for my return. The house smelled of fresh coffee and the flowers he'd planted in new pots. "Dad, I know I can't erase what I did," he told me while helping me with the suitcases, "but I want to try to make things right. Michael, the past is immutable, but the future is negotiable." I handed him an envelope I'd prepared. "These are the terms of our new arrangement." Inside was everything detailed. Michael would work with me restructuring the consulting business, but this time as a junior partner, not as owner. We'd live in the same house, but as adults who respect each other mutually, not as child and guardian. Important financial decisions would be made together, with complete transparency. "And the corporation that bought my debt?" he asked. "It's still mine. But now you know it exists." And when you prove you can handle responsibilities without lying, we'll talk about transferring some shares. How long will that take? It depends on you, son. But I suggest you start by making coffee. We have a lot of work to do. The first months were difficult. Michael had to unlearn 30 years of manipulation and secrecy habits. I had to learn to trust again in someone who had betrayed me in the most intimate way possible. But slowly, we began to function as a team. Michael turned out to be smarter than he'd shown when he was desperate. He had innovative ideas for expanding the consulting business, and I had the experience and contacts to implement them. "Dad," he told me one afternoon while we reviewed the books, "I realized something. I never told you I was proud of you." "Michael, pride is a mutual feeling, but it has to be earned, not declared. You're right, but I want you to know that I'm proud of how you handled this whole situation. I would have collapsed completely. Son, you wouldn't have gotten into this situation because you wouldn't have betrayed your father." I smiled to take the sting out of the words, but I'm glad we found a way to move forward together. Jennifer tried to return 6 months later, when she realized the financial situation had stabilized. But Michael, to my surprise, rejected her. "Dad," he explained to me afterward, "I realized Jennifer never loved me. She loved the idea of what I could provide. And when I couldn't provide, she left. That's not love. That's transaction. And now what do you want to do? I want to learn to be alone, to be a complete person without needing external validation. I think that's something I never learned." Michael, that's the first truly adult conversation we've had in years. 1 year after leaving the facility, Michael and I were sitting in the garden, enjoying the sunset and reviewing the company's financial statements. We'd had our best year in terms of profits, but more importantly, we'd had our best year in terms of relationship. "Dad," Michael said, closing the laptop, "can I ask you something?" "Always." "When did you know you were going to forgive me?" The question took me by surprise. I'd been so focused on reconstruction that I hadn't reflected on the exact moment when revenge had transformed into redemption. "Michael, I think I knew I was going to forgive you from the moment I decided to take revenge," I replied after thinking about it. "Real revenge isn't destroying the person who hurt you. Real revenge is turning them into someone better. And do you think I achieved it? Do you think I'm a better person now? Son, you're the person I always knew you could be. You just needed to remember that being good isn't being weak." That night, while Michael washed the dinner dishes, I received a call from Frank. "Bill, how's life outside the facility?" "Frank, it's good, complicated, but good." "And your son?" "My son is learning to be a man, and I'm learning to be his father, not his boss." "That sounds like your revenge was a success." "No, Frank, my revenge was a failure, but my love was a success." 2 years later, Michael had become a respected consultant in his field. He'd developed a reputation for honesty and transparency that had brought him important clients. More importantly, he'd developed a relationship with me based on mutual respect. "Dad," he told me one morning while we had breakfast, "I want to propose something to you." "Tell me." "I want us to create a foundation to help elderly people who have been abandoned in nursing homes, to ensure legal representation, to give them resources to defend themselves." The idea impacted me, not just for its generosity, but for what it represented. Michael had learned the most important lesson from this whole experience. "How do you plan to finance something like that?" "With my share of the company's profits, and with the corporation shares you promised me when I proved I could handle responsibilities." "Michael, are you sure? That represents a significant amount of money." "Dad, the money I got when I betrayed you never brought me happiness. But the money I've earned working honestly with you, that money means something. I want to use it for something meaningful." "And what name would you give the foundation?" "The William J. Williams Foundation. So everyone knows that elderly people aren't disposable." For the first time in years, I cried, not from sadness, but from pride. My son had understood that true wealth isn't in what you accumulate, but in what you give. He'd learned that respect isn't bought, it's earned. He'd learned that family isn't a transaction, it's a daily choice. Today, 5 years after Michael took me to see a more comfortable place, I'm sitting at my desk writing this story. The William J. Williams Foundation has helped more than 200 elderly people recover their dignity and their rights. Michael runs the operation with a passion I'd never seen in him. Frank left the facility last year. With help from our foundation, he now lives in a small but dignified apartment and comes to lunch with us every Sunday. Bill, he told me last Sunday, your revenge turned out to be the best thing that happened to your son. Frank, it wasn't revenge. It was love disguised as justice. Michael never remarried. He says he's focused on learning to be a better person before trying to be someone's partner. But he started dating Maria, a lawyer he met while working on foundation cases. She respects him for who he is, not for what he has. Dad, he told me yesterday while we reviewed new foundation cases, I have a confession. Tell me. Sometimes I feel guilty for being happy, like I don't deserve this second chance after what I did to you. Michael, guilt is only useful when it motivates you to be better. After that, it becomes a luxury you can't afford. A luxury? Yes, because while you feel guilty about the past, there are elderly people out there who need your help today. Guilt is selfish, Michael. Action is generous. He smiled at me with that genuine smile I'd missed for so many years. You're right, as always. No, son, as often, but I learn from my mistakes, and you've learned from yours. This morning, while I watered the garden plants that Michael had restored, I thought about how strange time is. 5 years ago, I was in a nursing home, feeling my life was over. Today I wake up every day with purpose, with meaningful relationships, with the satisfaction of knowing my experience is being used for something good. The revenge I had planned was simple. Destroy Michael financially, make him suffer as I had suffered. But the revenge I actually executed was more complex and more powerful. I transformed him into the man he'd always had the potential to be. It wasn't easy. There were days when I wanted to send him to hell. Days when his repentance seemed superficial. Days when I thought it would be easier to simply cut all ties. But true love doesn't seek the easy path. True love seeks the path that works. Michael brings me coffee every morning before going to the office. Not because it's his obligation, but because it's his choice. He tells me about his cases, his concerns, his hopes. He asks for my advice, not because he needs it, but because he values my perspective. Dad, he told me this morning, do you know what I like most about working with you? Tell me. That I finally feel like I know you, not as the dad who gave me money when I needed it, or the dad who solved my problems. I know you as a person, as William, not just as Dad. Michael, that's the most beautiful thing you've said to me in years. It's the most beautiful thing I've felt in years. Last week, we received a call from a 74-year-old woman whose son had emptied her bank accounts and had her committed to a public nursing home. Michael took the case personally, and I could see in his eyes that indignation I'd felt when it happened to me. Dad, he told me after the call, I can't believe there are people who do this. How can they treat their parents like this? Michael, 5 years ago you did exactly the same thing to me. He was quiet for a moment, then nodded. You're right. I guess it's easy to forget where we come from when we're comfortable where we are. Son, the difference is that you learned, and now you can use that experience to help others. Do you think she'll be able to forgive her son like you forgave me? Michael, forgiveness isn't something that's granted. It's something that's built, day by day, with consistent actions. You didn't ask for my forgiveness once, and that was it. You ask for my forgiveness every day with the way you treat me. And does it work? Have you really forgiven me? Son, I've forgiven you so much that sometimes I forget there was something to forgive. Last night, Michael and I went to visit Frank. We brought dinner and played cards late into the night. While Michael washed the dishes, Frank took me aside. Bill, he told me, do you ever regret not going through with your original revenge? Frank, this was my original revenge. I was just smarter than I knew myself. What do you mean? I wanted Michael to suffer the consequences of his actions. And he did. He lost his wife, lost his financial stability, lost his arrogance. But I also wanted him to learn to be a better person. And I achieved that too. And you, what did you gain? I got my son back, but not the son I had lost. I got a better son. Frank looked at me with that wisdom that only comes with years. Bill, do you know what's the difference between revenge and justice? Tell me. Revenge seeks for the other to suffer. Justice seeks for the other to learn. You chose justice, even though you disguised it as revenge. Frank, I think you're right. But the decision to choose justice over revenge wasn't conscious. It was instinctive. Instinctive? Yes. Because after 30 years of being a father, my instinct wasn't to destroy my son. It was to save him, even though he didn't know he needed saving. This morning, Michael brought me a letter. Dad, this arrived for you. It was from the 74-year-old woman we'd helped. Her son had returned the stolen money, had taken his mother out of the public nursing home, and they'd started family therapy. The letter ended with a line that made me smile. Thank you for showing me it's never too late to teach a son to be a better person. Michael, I said, read this. When he finished, he had tears in his eyes. Dad, do you realize what we've accomplished? Yes, son. We've made our experience serve something bigger than ourselves. Do you know what's the most ironic thing about all this? Tell me that my worst decision became the best thing that could have happened to me, because it led me to discover who I really am when I'm not pretending to be someone else. Michael, that's the most important lesson you can learn, that mistakes don't define you. What you do after the mistakes is what defines you. Dad, there's something I've never told you. What? That these last 5 years have been the best of my life. Not because of the money, not because of the company's success, not because of the foundation, but because I finally have a real relationship with you. Michael, for me they've also been the best years, because I finally have the son I always knew you could be. And now what? What's the next step? Now, son, we live without grudges, without guilt, without fears. We live as the people we've decided to be. As I write these last lines, Michael is at the office preparing the case of an elderly man whose grandchildren are trying to declare him incompetent to keep his inheritance. Maria is helping with the legal documentation. Frank is coming tomorrow for lunch and to tell us about his new project, teaching chess to underprivileged children. My house no longer smells of loneliness. It smells of fresh coffee, of garden flowers, of the satisfaction of knowing that every day has purpose. The rooms that once felt too big for one man now feel like the home of a family that chose itself. Michael had told me we're going to see a more comfortable place when he took me to the nursing home. He wasn't lying. He took me to see a more comfortable place. It just wasn't the one he thought. The most comfortable place turned out to be the relationship we built after we both learned who we really were. The most comfortable place was discovering that true love isn't about not hurting each other, but about learning to heal together when the damage is already done. That was the best decision of their lives, although it took 5 years to realize it. And when people ask me if I regret having forgiven so easily, I tell them I didn't forgive easily. I forgave intelligently, because I understood that the most powerful revenge against someone who hurts you isn't to destroy them, but to turn them into someone incapable of hurting you again. Michael will never betray me again, not because he's afraid of the consequences, but because he's become someone incapable of betrayal. That's the most complete revenge that exists, transforming your enemy into your ally, not out of fear, but out of love. And when I leave this world, I'll leave knowing I left something more valuable than money or property. I left a son who knows how to be a good man, and a foundation that will continue protecting other elderly people from suffering what I suffered. That's the real revenge, making sure it never happens to anyone else again. In the end, the sweetest revenge isn't the one that destroys those who hurt you, but the one that transforms them into someone capable of loving better. Because only when you understand that love is more powerful than hate Can you create a legacy that transcends your own life? William J. Williams, founder of the William J. Williams Foundation. The end.